Hi, welcome to another journey through the amazing world of Das Lied von der Erde. If you remember from the previous video, in 1908, Mahler read a book called The Chinese Flute, which was a collection of translations by Hans Bethge of Chinese poems. Now, Hans Bethge didn't translate his poems from the original Chinese poems, but from other translations. However, these days, on this website called mahlerarchives.net, you can find the original Chinese text and an English translation, but also the German text that Mahler read in Hans Bethge's version of the poems, and very interestingly here on the right, Mahler's alteration of the Hans Bethge version text. And it's very interesting to see why or how Mahler altered the text that he read. And it's very obvious to me, I think, that he altered this for musical purposes, really. He bent the text a little to fit his musical plan. First of all, if we look at Hans Bethge's text, we notice that it has a number of asymmetrical strophes. Some are longer, some are shorter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 strophes. Some, as I said, 3 lines long, some 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines long, some 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 lines long, and so on. What Mahler does is he swaps some of these lines around, he fuses some strophes together and gets rid of some lines, and he maintains pretty much the entire content of Hans Bethge's translation, but now it makes a lot better sense for musical purposes, because if you think about it, the most usual structure of a song, of a musical setting, of a poem, is to follow the strophic character of the poem. And if that poem has symmetrical strophes which follow a similar pattern and have a similar length, that allows the music to be reiterated. The musical material can be repeated with some variations or not. Now, of course, in this piece, if you know it, or if you hopefully know it by the end of these videos, you realize that Mahler never repeats himself. He always finds new ways to even bring the same musical material again. However, still, he needed something slightly more symmetrical to set. The text on the left, the Hans Bethge version, was simply a bit too illogical for musical purposes. And also, he notices something. He notices that one line is repeated more than any other. In fact, it's the only line really repeated in the Hans Bethge text. And this line is Dunkel ist das Leben, ist der Tod, which means dark is life, dark is death. And as you may notice, the last 3 strophes of Hans Bethge's text ended with that line. However, the second strophe originally started with that line. So Mahler changes that, fuses some strophes together, so that now each strophe will end with that line. Dunkel ist das Leben, ist der Tod. You see, each strophe now ends with that same line. Interestingly though, even now each strophe has different length, an increasing number of verses, and it will determine the musical structure. But now it's convenient for Mahler, and when we'll go through the harmonical structure of the song, I think we'll understand why. And as I just said, the last verse is always now the same. Dunkel ist das Leben, ist der Tod, which means that the musical material of the last verse of each strophe will be very similar. Okay? I think it's time to go a bit through an English translation of the final version of the text so that we understand what the song is about and get the sentiment of the song. And I'll try to speak a bit about why or what Mahler does musically with some of the verses. Although we haven't really touched the music yet, but I'll just anticipate a bit. Okay, so I'll read this poem for you. I'm not an actor, but I'll do my best. The first song is called The Drinking Song of the Earth's Sorrow, because in fact the entire piece initially was called The Song of the Earth's Sorrow, not just the Song of the Earth. Okay, so let's read the first poem. The wine is sparkling in the golden goblet, but don't drink it yet. First I'll sing you a song. The song of sorrow will echo through your souls, laughing out loud. When sorrow nears, the soul's gardens wither. Joy and song die. Life is dark as is death. Master of this house, your cellar holds a wealth of golden wine. I call this lute my own. To strike the lute and empty the glasses, these things go together. A full goblet at the right time is worth more than all the kingdoms of earth. Life is dark as is death. The sky is blue forever, and the earth will endure and bloom in spring. But you, how long will you live? You are not allowed to enjoy the rotten trifles of this earth for even 100 years. Look down there. In the moonlight on the grave squats a wild and ghostly figure. It's an ape. Listen as his cries pierce the sweet air of life. Now take the wine. Now it's time, my friends. Drain your golden cups. Life is dark, as is death. And you can see that it's a really interesting combination here between drunken enthusiasm, let's say, and dark ideas of death, really. Unfortunately, my English vocabulary is not extensive enough to be able to express what I believe about the poem and what Mahler does with it. But you see, it's basically a drinking song, yes. But it's not a fun drinking song. It's sort of the drinking song of a almost delirious drunk. Delirious with, who knows, pain or fear of death or fear of living, maybe, I don't know. But it's almost a febrile, delirious sentiment, I think, which leads to, it reminds me in a way of drinking in Dostoevsky, where they want to drink themselves to oblivion to escape life and so on. It's a dark drinking song. Yes, life is dark as is death. And at its climax, there's almost what Bernstein calls a hallucination. The person doing this, let's say, toast, sees an ape squatting in the moonlight on the graves. The ape is a wild and ghostly figure. Yes, and also hears his cries that pierce the sweet air of life. Now, life was one of the words, as you can notice here. Life, what is it? Just a second. Lebens. Life here, Lebens, was one of the words that Mahler altered, because initially it was Abends, not Lebens. So initially would have been listen as his cries pierce the sweet air of the evening, which is quite a bit less dramatic. You can understand then listen as his cries pierce the sweet air of life, especially when in Mahler's musical setting of this is the loudest point and the climax of the piece, a big B flat sustained note high in the tenor and loud in the orchestra. Life as a contrast to death. I think it's very effective, so he changes that. Also, very important in this poem and in the entire cycle, I think, are these lines that start last strophe. The sky is blue forever, and the earth will endure and bloom in spring. Because in fact, the last few lines of the entire piece resume this idea. The sky is blue forever, and the earth will endure and bloom in spring. But we'll get to that when we discuss the last song. But look at this. The sky is blue forever, forever, forever. These are the last words of the entire piece, of the entire Das Lied von der Erde. And in fact, it's in some way the final conclusion, the final revelation, let's say, in front of death, of the entire piece, that nature will be forever and it will renew itself forever, even if we are transient, we humans, and we end with death. Nature will outlast us and is blue forever and forever new. Okay, I think it would be good now, I think, to go a bit through the musical material. Just give me a second. Okay, sorry, we are here. Okay, this is, I need to skip that a bit. The first subject of the music is loud, expansive, and heroic, I call it. If I had a better English vocabulary, I'm sure I'd find more appropriate ways to describe it. The second subject is a variation or a development of the first subject. And I use this word developing variation, which actually is a concept introduced by Schoenberg. When Schoenberg used this term, developing variation, he didn't refer specifically to Mahler, but to pretty much the entire tonal music. Schoenberg thought that developing variation was pretty much the basic principle used by all the composers in tonal music. Developing variation is like a combination between development, motivical and thematic development, and variation. And maybe perhaps on its own it's difficult to understand, but hopefully when you go a bit through the musical material, you'll see how much Mahler uses this developing variation technique. Hopefully it will be more obvious and easier to understand what is meant by this to you as well. Because, as you see, I put here the word subject in quotes, because it's almost difficult to divide this song and even some of the subsequent songs. It's almost impossible to really divide them in a first subject and a second subject, because most times the subject themselves change throughout the song all the time, and frequently the second subject, if there is a second subject, is very much derived from the first subject, almost like a variation through a process of development. Yes? Okay. I think I'm going to play for you now an excerpt of what I call the first subject of the song, so you understand and hopefully remember afterwards what I mean by the first subject. And then we'll play through the so-called second subject of the piece, and hopefully you'll see how the two are already related, and hopefully understand why Mahler uses them the way he uses them, and so on. So let's listen a bit to an excerpt of the opening of the song and the so-called first subject of the piece. The B section, or so-called second subject, is a lot more stable harmonically and tonally. It has a lighter, more dance-like character and generally a soft dynamic range. Perhaps you remember what I mentioned earlier, that there is a clear relationship between the two subjects. For example, the first violins play a motif that is very much similar to the motif that starts the entire piece in the horns. The second flute accompanies that with a passage of fast grace notes, and only a few bars later the first flute plays a passage of descending chromatic semiquavers almost identical to the passage that the oboes play at the beginning of the first subject. So Mahler uses again this technique that Schoenberg called developing variation, where entire pieces are made of subject and themes that are very much related to each other and generated through a process that combines development with variation. I think it's time for us to look a little bit at the structure of the entire song now. So we understand a bit what Mahler does with these so-called first and second subjects and how he uses these to set the entire poem to music. Okay, so let's go back a bit here, right? The first strophe here. The first subject is in A minor, very loud, powerful, as I said, starting with the powerful horns in unison and the descending arpeggios in the violins and the violas. Then, slowly, I'll show more in detail a bit later, gravitates, modulates towards the second subject in G minor. Then that very suddenly goes back to the first subject again, maintaining the same G minor, and then later, after another, most of the time, I'll just say, most of the time, in the first two strophes, when I refer to the first subject, I actually mean the entire section dominated by this first initial musical idea. Both times is made of two iterations of the first subject, let's say. And the second one ends up modulating towards the second subject. So in the second strophe, that first iteration of the first subject modulates back from G minor to A minor, and the second iteration modulates from A minor to A flat minor. To see that this is quite adventurous, quite remote from keys, modulations from the A minor, original A minor. The third strophe, if you remember, is the longest in text. That allows Mahler to have a sort of a development section in which elements of both so-called subjects are developed together. Now, again, I have to say that when I say first subject and second subject in these songs, I said it's very relative, because they are very much variations of each other and made of similar motifs or motifs derived from each other, and it's almost artificial to separate them like that. But it sort of makes sense. So the third strophe starts with a sort of a development section, during which Mahler slowly comes back from the remote key of A flat minor to the initial A minor, and we have a final iteration, longer and more expansive and louder and more climatic than the previous ones, with the first subject again. It culminates, if you remember, in that text about the ape and what is it here? It culminates, it reaches a climax in this line. It's an ape, listen as his cries pierce the sweet air of life. Yes? Okay, and then we have a very short coda that concludes the entire song. I think now we should have a quick look at the harmonic relations and the tonality and journey and modulations that Mahler uses in this song. In tonal music, it is essential, if you want to understand the compositional process and the structure of a piece, it is essential to understand the harmonic relations and the modulations and the tonal structure of the piece. They often support and underline the entire music. In fact, many people claim that composers in the past, composers who wrote music in the tonal tradition, such as Mahler. Mahler, of course, was one of the last representatives of the great symphonic German tradition. So many believe that composers like Mahler conceived and planned ahead these relationships even before they would write down themes and decide on the motives and main thematic elements of the piece. So let's go a little bit, check this. Now my handwriting is not very good here because I wrote most of it on the plane while flying back from our tour with the orchestra. So forgive the bad handwriting and hopefully you understand what I'm trying to write here. So first of all, in the first strophe, which you may remember is the shortest one in terms of text, I started to sketch the harmonic process from the second iteration of the first subject. Remember that the first subject, the A section, so-called, is almost always made of two iterations of the main subject, let's say. The second one, and 1A, is usually the one used to modulate towards the second subject. Yes, so here in the first strophe, from 1A first subject, second iteration of the second subject, forgive me, from the second iteration of the first subject to the second subject, we modulate from A minor to G minor via B flat major and D minor, which becomes the dominant of G minor. And then from the second subject to conclusion, by conclusion really I mean pretty much the last phrase of each strophe, which is the last line, the last verse that the tenor sings. If you remember from our discussions on the text, is this line that concludes every strophe: life is dark as is death, life is dark as is death. In German is Dunkel ist das Leben, ist der Tod. So from the journey from second subject to conclusion, to the conclusion of each strophe, it's always let's say tonally closed because it starts and ends in the same key. The reason for which I sketched this as well, because I could just only be interested, let's say, about changes of tonality, for example, from A minor to G minor here, and not necessarily analyze when tonality doesn't change what is happening. The only reason for which I do that is because I think expressively the cadence from, in the first strophe, for example, from G minor to C major and back to G minor. This C major cadence, I think, is particularly expressive, and it's exactly transposed, basically a semitone higher at the end of the second strophe. This transposition of a semitone higher happens in every strophe. That the very last line, Dunkel ist das Leben ist der Tod. You see it here. Dunkel ist das Leben ist der Tod. As I said, every single time it appears as a conclusion to a strophe, every single time it comes a semitone higher. So if the second subject and the second subject, the conclusion, is mainly in G minor at the end of the first strophe, it will be in A flat minor at the end of the second strophe. Sorry, so first strophe ends in G minor, yes, so if the second subject, the conclusion, ends in G minor at the end of the first strophe, at the end of the second strophe it will be in A flat minor, and at the end of the first strophe it will be in A minor. It's really quite late here, so my thoughts aren't very clear. Okay, so let's go to the second strophe now, which is a bit more complex because text is longer, and now we have to travel to more remote tonalities modulating, because as I already mentioned, Mahler has this plan to end each strophe a semitone higher. So in the second strophe he first comes back from G minor to A minor in the first iteration of the first subject, yes, so the first iteration goes from G minor to A minor through a fairly complicated process, diminished C, C major in the second inversion, B flat major, A minor, from this point A minor, D major, A major, E major and A, we cement basically A minor, because of course D major, A major, E major become degrees of the new tonality A minor, so subdominant, tonic and dominant. In the second iteration of the first subject, now that we made our way back to the main tonality of the song, A minor, in the second iteration of this first subject we travel towards the pre-planned, let's say, A flat minor, because we said each strophe will end a semitone higher than the previous one. So Mahler gets to A flat minor via B flat major, G flat major and E flat minor, and then that second subject and the conclusion, which is of course, to remind you, the line Dunkel ist das Leben ist der Tod, that always is closed tonally, yes, so it stays in A flat minor, and exactly like the first strophe, as I said, follows the same harmonic progression, in this case with a bright D flat major cadence, and the conclusion is followed by a sort of a version, instrumental version of it. So the phrase that the tenor sings, Dunkel ist das Leben ist der Tod, is followed almost immediately by the violins playing something, a sort of a variation of the main motive of the piece, but also similar to the conclusion that the tenor sings, Dunkel ist das Leben ist der Tod, immediately in A flat major. So you get this slightly ambivalent feeling and suggestion from Mahler at the end of the second strophe that yes, dark is life and death, but it's somehow sweet at the same time, so it's bittersweet, let's say. And then the third strophe which is the most complex harmonically and tonally. It's logically so because it's also the longest in text. So when we talked about the text of the song at the beginning of this video, I said that there was a reason for which Mahler chose or planned, let's say, to have each strophe when he altered the Hans Betke translation. There was a reason for which each strophe was getting longer and longer. That is because it allowed him to develop and vary further the motives and the themes with each strophe. Remember again what I said earlier about this technique that Schoenberg called developing variation. So in the third strophe, there is a slightly longer orchestral interlude in which the motif that the horn plays at the very beginning of the piece is now played in a totally different character by the cor anglais, and the descending arpeggio-like line that the violins and violas play at the beginning of the piece, the first subject, is now played by the muted trumpet. So the cor anglais and the muted trumpet, although play something very similar to the horns and the violins and violas in the beginning of the piece, now transform completely the character of that first subject. Similarly, how in previous compositions of previous composers, the development will transform the themes presented in the exposition of a piece, let's say a sonata form. So the beginning of the first strophe is very much written in a sort of a almost symphonic development style. Mahler takes elements from the first subject and some from the so-called second subject and alters them and combines motifs together and splits them and reassembles them into new tunes, like a, let's say, masterful composer would in a development section. The harmonic process here is again more complex, and the singer, the tenor, joins in this developmental process with his first lines in the first strophe, and then as we arrive back to A minor from what was at the end of the second strophe, the A flat minor, yes, A flat minor, as we make it back to A minor, the first subject comes in full force as we heard it pretty much in the previous strophes. That is with the horns in unison and the violins with, playing those descending arpeggios, and this time, for the first time really, the singer finally joins into this, let's say, main motif of the first subject, the arpeggios that the violins play downwards. And what happens is that, unlike in the other two strophes of the poem, this time Mahler no longer makes a journey towards a second subject, but expands until the end of the poem, the first subject. It varies it further. You can see that why he does that is because the first subject is, as I said earlier, is loud and heroic and expansive, and the text for the song leads to that climatic moment that I spoke about earlier with the apes squatting on the graves and so on, and it was much more suitable for that to arrive in a climax of the first subject, let's say, of the song, rather than in a soft second subject. So Mahler then builds on that first subject until the end of the song, where he gets again back to that conclusion that I call life is dark as is death, being again the last line of the strophe for the singer. Dunkel ist das Leben, ist der Tod. And I want to show you something else here that he does, and it's a characteristic often of Mahler. That when he introduces something, you will see in many other songs, he almost immediately introduces its opposite at the same time. He likes very much to put opposites together and to contradict himself, let's say. So, as an example, here we have this Dunkel ist das Leben ist der Tod, dark is life as is death, yes, line in A minor, in theory very dark. It comes after the climax of the song, but just before that, the violins anticipate with this beautiful line in A major. So the major, let's say, version of it comes before, so we have G sharps and C sharps. C sharps we have in the harp, for example, here. But immediately we have C naturals, F naturals, you see. And again, at the same time, we have C sharps. Yes, so it's this contradiction between the major and the minor in pretty much every instrument, almost every bar or every other bar. Look, C natural here, C sharp here. Let's go up. Check. This is the bassoon, tenor clef, C sharp, C natural. So I have C sharp here, C natural here. Same with the clarinets, yes, because it's clarinet in B, so this is C sharp in concert, C sharp, C natural. The oboe, C natural, C sharp, flute, same. So constant change between C sharps and C natural. We have sharps here, we have C natural in the tenor line. So what this does is that it gives this final line, Dunkel ist das Leben ist der Tod, dark is life as is death, a contradictory emotion in a way. Yes, it is dark, but it is presented also as a nostalgic feeling that we yearn for. So on one hand, we fear that, or we say it's dark as life, but at the same time we yearn for it. It's beautiful. And we'll see how these feelings towards death evolve throughout the rest of Das Lied von der Erde. I think this video is already honestly really quite long. I hope it will make you curious to listen to the entire song and to this is just a fairly summary presentation, I think, of the song, but it's again, as usual, very late. Here is after 3 in the morning, and I'm working tomorrow, and I think I spend enough time on this, but hopefully it makes you interested in listening to the song and knowing it better. So if you can, listen to a few versions and go through the text and make your own opinions and views about this song. This is the first song in the cycle, and hopefully I'll manage to go through each song, and as we go through each song afterwards, we'll see how they are connected and how this is a fusion between, I'll anticipate what I'll say in later videos, a fusion between a symphony and a song cycle, and how we have not only a musical journey but a psychological and dramatic journey through the entire piece of views on what death is and what life is, and how we deal with death, and how we have a revelation maybe at the end of the piece. Okay, see you in further videos, and hopefully I won't bore you as much as in this video. Thanks, bye.